Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome. For anybody who may not know me, my name is Hannah Cole. I'm the Life Enrichment Coordinator for West for Independent Living. And with us today, I'm really pleased to introduce Ann Sant and Roberta Newton. They are retired professors of Temple University, and they come from the Piedmont Bird Club. And they're going to discuss environmental efforts and their journey to Antarctica, what they encounter along the way, some of their exciting birding, and share that with us. So if everybody would go ahead and silence their cell phones and join me in welcoming Miss Ann and Roberta.
I'm not going to wear this all the time, but I wanted you to know what we wore when we were in. The problem is that it actually was as warm there as it is here now. It wasn't really cold, from my perspective, but we had to wear these big orange jackets because the snow is white, and when we would get on the islands or on the continent and walk around to see things, they wanted to be able to find us. So we had to wear bright attire. My colleague Roberta is right back here. She also brought an orange jacket so she wouldn't get wet. And I forgot to wear my penguin hat. Which was part of our attire when we were on the trip. So when you journey to Antarctica, most people leave from South America. I have a map there, and this is looking at the bottom of the world, as I was taught. That was the bottom of the world down there. But Antarctica is right in the center, and you can see up to the left on the slide the southern part of South America, and then go over to the right and around, and you'll see South Africa, and then around to Australia. Those are the closest areas to Antarctica, and most people leave from Argentina or Chile just because it's a lot closer when you take a cruise over to Antarctica. So we did leave from there. Let me see if I can. The little town at the tip that we left from, which is a port, is called Ushuaia, and it's on the Beagle Channel, which is a man-made channel that cuts through. Before that was cut through, Magellan Strait was the way that people got from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean at that end of the continent. Ushuaia is on a peninsula called Tierra del Fuego Island. And it is half owned by Chile and half owned by Argentina. And the port of Ushuaia is in Argentina. Now, when we traveled down there, we first started in Buenos Aires and took a plane down to Ushuaia. And when they got us off the plane, they took us over to the national park in Tierra del Fuego National Park, which is where the Patagonia Mountains end. They end at the sea on this island. The little boat or catamaran that you see in that cove is on the Beagle Channel, and that catamaran is our destination from the park. We were dropped off sort of at the parking lot by the headquarters, and we hiked down to the catamaran. It gave us something to do while the ship got ready for us, because it had dropped off its passengers that had just brought back from Antarctica, got cleaned up and ready for us to arrive. So they had to do something with us on that day, and going to the park and then going on a cruise on the Beagle Channel was our activity. But walking down, I don't know why my name is up there, walking down, that's supposed to be a little copyright. It's supposed to be about this big at the bottom of the picture. I hope that doesn't happen all the time, but it might, and you never know. This is a Sierra finch that we saw just walking along the trail heading down to the catamaran. And this is a little thorn-tailed rayadito. That's a sweet little bird that only eats insects, and it was foraging on the trees, and it was in the lichen and trying to find things to eat. As we walked down the trail, we got into some grassland area, and this is an upland goose. Beautiful bird, absolutely beautiful, hiding in the grass, and it sort of surprised me when all of a sudden there was the bird right there. And then there are 3 fledglings that she had with her, and they were foraging around. Very, very pretty birds. So we're getting closer to the catamaran, and lunch is waiting on board. So we headed down to the dock, and as soon as we all got on, we started to move, and they were going to serve lunch, and I was going out on the deck to take pictures. I was hungry, but not that hungry. So this is the kind of terrain that we saw along the Beagle Channel. It's very rocky. There are lots of cliffs and very, very rugged territory. And the mountains in the background are the Patagonia Mountains. Our first birds in the Beagle Channel were Magellan penguins. They have a little crescent on their face, and they're really only seen there and in the Strait of Magellan. So they're not Antarctica penguins, but they are South American penguins. And they usually hang around in small groups like this. Sleeping on the rocks, lots of South American sea lions. And the blonde-colored ones that you see in this picture are female. And the male, who was sleeping nearby, has like a bulldog nose. And he's always darker. He has a dark fur coat. We also saw a gull-like sized bird called a skua. And skuas are predator birds. They eat fledglings and eggs from other birds that are nesting. I think they also will eat fish, but they prefer birds. And we'll see 3 different kinds of skua as we go through the talk. But this one is native to that area of South America. Here he is in flight. They're dark. This one has a combination of dark coloring and lighter tan coloring, but they always have a white wing patch. So you can spot a skua in the air based on that wing patch. And this is a southern giant petrel. Petrels are really cool birds. They're totally pelagic, which means they live at sea primarily, although they will come in on the land and nest. The southern giant petrel is known because he has a light green tip to his beak, where the northern giant petrel has sort of a caramel colored beak on the tip. And they also have the ability to extract and excrete salt from their bloodstream because they drink salt water, and then they have a mechanism. They have glands above their beak that is a filtering system, and then the salt will come out through the little tubes at the top of their beak. So petrels are all have that tubular kind of nose. Here's an albatross, the black-browed albatross, and he's in among a bunch of gulls. The albatross obviously is bigger. He's got a wingspan of 6 or 7 feet, and you can see his eyebrow. He's right in the center of the picture. He also has glands at the top of his beak that will filter the salt water out, but he excretes them actually through his bill, and it comes out at the tip of his bill, the excreted salt. This is a South American tern that was flying over the channel, And this is one of my favorite pictures just because it was a big surprise to me that I got a picture as good as that. And when we had a little slideshow at the end of our journey, the National Geographic photographer looked at that and told me that one is National Geographic quality. And yes, finally, every once in a while you get lucky. I didn't take it in Antarctica, I didn't tell him that, but I think he knew what the bird was. Here's a tern breeding colony on the Beagle Channel, and you can see the terns on the rocks, and then of course flying all around, and they're coming and going to feed the young. I caught a picture of this one with a fish in his mouth, bringing, I guess, a little anchovy in for the family. And then this is a Magellanic shag. They're like our cormorants. How many of you know what a cormorant is? You've seen them on the lakes and so on around here. We have double-crested cormorants. These are a different species. The shags generally are coastal birds. They don't go inland, and they usually breed and hang out on rocky coasts. Now, they were originally named shags by British sailors because they thought the crests on their heads looked shaggy. So that's how they got their name of shag. The Magellanic shag is distinctive because he has a red face. And if you look carefully, you'll see the red behind his beak and around his eyes. Here's a group of them nesting on the rocks on the Beagle Channel. They build their nests out of mud and grass. And all the birds, the fledglings and chicks and so on, are gray colored or dark colored, some of them almost look black. An adult shag will have a white chest, maybe even their neck is white. It depends on the particular species, but the adult birds have white on their chest. Now, this is an imperial shag, and he differs from the one we just saw because he has yellow warty skin above his beak. That's how we tell the difference, is just by the look on their, the color of their facial skin and so on. And here is the imperial shag and their nestlings. And they actually have a breeding colony at the base of the main lighthouse on the Beagle Channel, which I thought was pretty cool. And you can see it's breeding season when we're there, so we're seeing lots and lots of shags. Just to compare, when the British sailors gave the name shag to these birds, they said cormorants, weren't really shags. However, we could beg to differ with him. Our double-crested cormorants have shags on their head, but I guess he didn't know about our version here in the United States. So anyhow, they named them what they knew. They actually are smaller. The shags are smaller birds than our cormorants. Now here's the Nat Geo Explorer. It holds 148 passengers, so it's not a really big ship, but it's got quite a crew on it, including photographers, naturalists, all the people who in the ship, people who feed you, people who clean the rooms, maintenance people, guides that take you out on zodiacs into the cold water to see things. So it's a pretty small but very busy ship, and they have just about everything you could ever want on that ship, including really good food. So we left from Ushuaia in the evening, and we had an overnight trip into the Drake's Passage, but the water was so calm, unlike what everybody tells us is going to happen when you go across Drake's Passage. It was Drake's Lake. It was as calm as it could be. We really didn't have any waves, and they made great time going across the passage. In the morning, when we got up, there were lots of Cape petrels flying over and around the wake of the ship. They're beautiful black and white birds. Here's a close-up of a couple of them as they were flying over. And they're not that big. They have about a 3-foot wingspan, so maybe they're like our gulls, possibly size with a wingspan, but they're a little not as bulky as some of our gulls are. Here's his little tubular nose. He's a petrel, so he's got that little exit tube for the salt that he takes out of his bloodstream. And here is a northern giant petrel, and here the northern giant petrel is in the same picture with the little Cape petrel down at the bottom. I have an arrow pointing to the tiny little Cape petrel compared to the northern giant, so you can get a sense of the size difference between those birds. Now, we've come across most of Drake's passage, but we have a ways to go. So we really spent the day at sea. And then in the morning, we're heading to Robert Island. And that is on the peninsula. And we're going to visit, up at the top, you'll see the circle. And we're going to visit there first. But on the way, in the morning, we had a fin whale appear, and this is the second largest whale on Earth. He is about 70 feet long, not as big as a blue whale, but he's darn big. And you can tell him because he has what's considered a pretty substantial dorsal fin, which is not the case for the blue whale, and we'll see that later. We're approaching Robert Island. And once we got there, they dropped anchor and we jumped into Zodiacs and we head to shore. So greeting us on the shore was a little chinstrap penguin, sweet little thing, and he's known because of the little black chin strap that's underneath his beak. And then there were gentoo penguins there too. And we call this one the lipstick penguin because he looks like he's wearing lipstick. He's a lot bigger than the little chin strap. He's also very fast. He can swim up to 60 miles an hour, believe it or not. Amazing. Amazing what they can do. Here are elephant seals on the beach, and they are big old things, and I'm not so sure that the color here is the same as the coloration in the sea lions where you can tell gender, but they're not quiet animals. They hunt and groan and bark at each other and all that kind of thing. So, and they also do unpleasant things, like they make unpleasant odors. So when you're walking around, you know they're nearby. I was infatuated with their flippers, and they are seals, even though they're big. Seals have to drag themselves with their upper flippers, where the sea lions can get up on their flippers and walk and use their tail flipper also to help them walk above the ground. But not seals. They slither and slide along the beach. But they were just fascinating. And we could get very close to them, so it was fun to take pictures up close. Here's the howl and growl and grunts that go on. All of a sudden, one will pick its head up and just yell. We found a little gentoo penguin with its mom. She's feeding the bird there. Their nests are made out of rocks. They don't use any vegetation in their nests. It's just a pile of rocks. Here's a mom with 2 babies, and that's the back end of babies. And up above them, between the rocks is a southern giant petrel, keeping an eye on what's going on, because they're also predators. So the penguins are always keeping an eye on the petrels, and the petrels are always keeping an eye on the penguins. Here's brown skua. This is the second kind of skua we encountered, flying over the Gen 2 penguins. And notice how they're all sort of looking up, keeping an eye on what's going on. He's a big, bulky bird, and I was able to get this picture which shows how chunky he is. There's very little vegetation on Antarctica. There aren't any trees. There's just grass, which is called hairgrass, and then pearlwort. And pearlwort is in bloom there. It's the little pearly looking things to the right and left of the grass. There are lichens that are all over the rocks and so on, but other plant material is not in Antarctica. Here's the National Geographic taking us from Robert Island now to Half Moon Island. At Half Moon Island, again, we have a little chin strap down on the beach waiting for us, and they're rocky beaches. We found a lot of chin straps with fledglings there. And I had to take a picture of their feet. They have goth manicures or pedicures done, but their feet are just fascinating. They also will throw their heads back up in the air and squawk, particularly if they've got a predator flying overhead. They're doing that. And there was a kelp gull up on the rocks. That's the only gull that we saw. Just the one species is in Antarctica. And there is a little pile of limpet shells, which I think you can see falling down through the rocks toward the bottom of the picture. That's how you know that the kelp gulls are nesting there, because they feed limpets to their young, and these are the shells that are excreted after they get the mollusk out of the shell. Here's a fledgling that I found with an Antarctic tern sitting on a rock, and that's the kelp gull fledgling meeting a new neighbor. And here's an Antarctic tern. And here are some nesting. And another southern giant petrel flying over. And here is a snowy sheathbill. This bird is about the size of our pigeons, and it is a garbage collector. It will eat penguin poop and everything else that it can find. So it is definitely important. It's like our vultures. It is the garbage collector of the area. In the evening, we went for a cruise around A51A. Well, what in the world is that? A51A is a very large iceberg. And the way that icebergs are named are using a quadrant system that NOAA has developed, where the iceberg breaks off the continent is in one of those four quadrants, and it's either A, B, C, or D break off. So the first name of any iceberg that comes off of the quadrant A is going to have first name of A, and then its second name will be the number of, in succession, of icebergs that came before it plus one. So this was A56 or 57, A57, this one I think. And then A has to do with the fact, the little a has to do with the fact that it broke apart. The big one broke apart into two parts. One, the bigger one, is called A, and the littler one is called B. So that's how they name them. And they just refer to it as that. And you can track them. NOAA has satellites, so you can go up and see what's happening with them if you're interested. This is a view of A-57A from the drone that we had on the ship, and they sent the drone up to get pictures for us to see what we were looking at from a different perspective. And you can see that Nat Geo Explorer, you know, sort of in the center to the left of the iceberg, the ship is there. That was about 13 3/4 mile long and about 5.5 miles wide. When we came home, I went up to NOAA, and I didn't see too much about that particular iceberg, but then in July, they took a picture of it, and I have it circled in red. So the iceberg was still there in July, floating off the continent. Now, after we finished our trip around the iceberg, we cruised around it, we headed into the Weddell Sea, which is on the east side of the peninsula. We were on our way to make some other landings there, and so we passed humpback whales on the way in, and Adelie penguins, which is a new species. They are small penguins, indigenous to just Antarctica, and they have a little blue eye ring. I've got a close-up picture so you get to see them up close and personal. But that little iceberg, piece of ice, we call a growler. And it's called a growler because when it melts, air is emitted from underneath, and it makes a growling sound. So that's why they call it a growler. It's defined as a piece of ice that is no higher off the water than 3 feet. And so it makes a great raft for penguins. They love growlers. Now, we're approaching Paulet Island, and that's on in the Weddell Sea. And that island is home to 100,000 nesting pairs of Adelie penguins. Think about it. That's a lot of penguins on an island. And all the little specks you see on the land there and up along the cliffside are either Adelie penguins or Antarctic shags. They both breed on Paulet Island. Here's another view. Now, one of the things that's sort of neat is that you can tell who's breeding where. If you see areas on that slide where the ground looks pinkish compared to other areas where it looks whiter where the birds are, the pinkier color is associated with the penguins. And that's because they eat krill, which is like a little shrimp-like animal, sea animal, and they have pink exoskeletons. So when they excrete, they're excreting the shells of the krill, and that makes their poop pink. So when you see dirty penguins, they got pink all over them. This is an Antarctic krill. They're about 2 inches long, so this is a blow-up of them. But that's the diet that they eat. And it's a very rich diet. It's very plentiful in subarctic waters, and so it is the main food source for penguins. And now we have humans who think they want to eat krill too. So there's a little, competition for the food supply, and with global warming, that's affecting it as well. So even though there's still a lot of krill around, it is something to watch out for and be concerned about. We have both breeding colonies there. And I took these pictures from the Zodiac. We went on a cruise. around through the growlers to see what we could see. So here are a couple little Adelie penguins, and I'll show you the antics that we saw along the way. The march to the sea. The diving team. A choir. Boy, is he skinny. I don't know. He's a really skinny penguin. And this guy wanted his portrait taken. And while we were cruising around through the growlers, we came upon a southern giant petrel getting ready to take off. So I'll show you a little series here of this poor bird. There was no wind, so he had to run down along the ice to get airborne. When the wind is down, it's very hard for those big birds to get up. So they use the wind to their advantage if it's available. Up and away. We went on to the island, and we were surrounded by penguins everywhere. There's a hut there because there was a shipwreck offshore, and the surviving crew, it was ship Antarctica, they landed on Paulet Island, and they built a shack, and they lived there until they were rescued. And only one man of the survivors from the wreck, I don't think everybody got off the wreck, but those who did, only one had died by the time that the people got rescued. So there is also a grave there. Here are some shags with their babies. And here's a mom, Adelie, with her babies. This little guy was like, kept looking at me. So. And this is a creche of fledgling Adelie penguins. When they get that size, both parents have to be involved in going out to sea to get food for them. So what happens is the young Adelies stay together in groups on the beach, and there's safety in numbers. So they're called a creche. And there were a number of creches on that beach that we saw. But when the parents come back, they can find their own and make sure they get fed. But in the meantime, they hang out together. Other bird groups do that. Other kinds of shorebirds do it. I've seen that in Alaska, where there are creches of gulls that were left, fledgling gulls by their parents. Here's another growler. And here's a Weddell seal in the Weddell Sea, which I thought was pretty cool that we got to see one named for the sea in which it is indigenous. They say that this seal looks like a big sausage. I agree. It looks like a brat to me. And we saw humpback whales nearby. And as you know, humpbacks, probably you know this, humpbacks have signature tails or flukes, and that's how we identify. One is like a fingerprint. We can tell one whale from the other based on the fluke. This is a different whale. We saw a tabular iceberg, which is really cool. It has a big table on the top of it. It's very tall. And we saw a lot of Adelies porpoising. They jump out of the water sometimes 3 feet off the sea, and they use that to keep momentum going, to look around, to see what's around, and also they use it to jump up onto the growlers and so on. There's a couple of them. You can see chains of them going across the sea down there. Now this is a little juvenile, well, he's not so little, he's a juvenile emperor penguin and a little Adelie. that the captain called us from lunch to said, you gotta get up here, because the emperor penguins are usually gone from Antarctica when we were there. They've left a month or so earlier to go out to sea. So it's really unusual to see any in January. So he saw one from the brig, he called us up, you gotta, get your jackets on, get up on here and see what's going on. So here is the poor little emperor penguin confronting two Adelies who started belly bumping him. They would run up to him, push him with their belly, and he's like trying to get away from them. And he's got two of them after him, and he finally gets down on his belly and starts using his flippers to get as far away from them as possible. And then it was sort of sad. After they left him alone, he's standing there like, what do I do now? And while we were at dinner, a blue whale appeared. So the captain calls us up again to come see the blue whale. And the blue whale actually came in pretty close to the ship. He has a mottled sort of blue-gray color to him. And you can see how big he is. He's about 100 feet long. But you see his tiny little fin at the back of his back, like toward the right. He has a teeny tiny little dorsal fin. And people who talk about it say it's just an embarrassment to him. His fin is tiny. So now we're approaching another island where we're going to see a lot of shags. This is a rock by the island. This is Colburn Island that we were going to. It reminded me of a whale's tail, but there's a group of National Geographic folks in a Zodiac going by the rock, and on top of the rock are kelp gulls, and then there's a shag flying by. And on the shore there was a whole big group of Adelie penguins, and they were sort of running along the shoreline, and all of a sudden one put his foot in, and then we got several deciding, well, we'll try the water. And then they all began to try the water. And then there were a few left over, but they just ran along the shore, I guess, picking another place to jump in. This is an immature Antarctic shag. Immature because he has brown feathers instead of all black. That's how we can tell. And here's a mature one. Nice picture of a kelp gull. Are you beginning to get an idea of what the birds are of Antarctica? Gulls, penguins, shags. There's a little kelp gull fledgling. Every time you see kelp gulls, you know somewhere there's a nest with fledglings at that time of year. And here in this picture, you can see 4 snowy sheathbills. One is flying, and 3 of them are along the ice, the top of the ice. On the island, we found, on Colburn Island, we found a snowy sheathbill with her chick. And I guess that he nested in under the rocks because he was sort of peeking out and then he'd run back onto the rocks. The shag was standing nearby. We then left the Weddell Sea and went out into the ocean, and we turned to the south. So we're going to get into icy water now as we head south. And the further south you go, the more ice you're going to see. So this is what our first stop was in the icy water. This is Zerva Cove, and we got out and we went on an ice cruise. Now, ice can look sort of like, well, wait a second. First of all, we found a Weddell Sea who had escaped from the Weddell Sea, and he was on sea ice, and the sea ice ripples because of wave action. This is not, it never has been on land. It's always ice on the sea, and then it The wave action and the wind and the dust make it ripple. So here is this guy on a ripple of sea ice. And nearby was an ice baguette. And because he looks like a sausage, and there's a baguette nearby, I'm getting hungry. Here's a cardinal iceberg. Iceberg, not iceberg. Do you see him?
Yes.
He's looking to the right. And then there's an ice bear.
We did
And there's a muppet. And we saw blue ice and fin. Blue ice has had the air compressed out of it, and that's why it's blue. And the snow that falls on top of it is called fern. And so this is blue ice with fern on top. Here's a seal. Do you see him? The ice seal in there? You see his eye? There's an ice nacho. And here's a blue ice burger. And then we ran into a leopard seal. And this is the worst of all predators for the penguins. He is ferocious, and he prefers penguin over anything else. He has a reptilian-like head. That's how they describe him. Here's a Wilson storm petrel. They're hard to find, so we were pretty excited about seeing one of those. Here he is up closer. And here are shags landing on the rocks to bring food into their kitties. There, the young bird is the biggest one there. His big long gray neck. And there are a lot of chinstrap penguins in the same area. I just thought this was a pretty picture of the sheathbill over the penguins flying in. See if there was anything he needed to clean up. And of course, a kelp gull with a pile of limpet shells nearby. And then there was a crab-eater seal. They're very pretty little seals, and they're not really that much of a predator for the penguins. We went to an area called Amber's Bay, and I took pictures in the evening light of a little show we had going on in the bay. Here's a minke whale breaching, and orcas. They played in that bay around our ship until we were too tired and had to go to bed. But they were out there playing in the evening light. So now we're heading further south, and we're going to go down to Peterman Island and Nickel Harbor, Useful Island, and we'll be going through the Lemire Channel. So this is Amber's Bay in the morning light, which is also pretty. For a photographer, you always want to get pictures in the evening and in the morning because the light is so beautiful. This is Lemire's Channel. And on the other side was Peterman Island. And you can see the ice. We landed, and there were a lot of gentoo nesting sites there. And then we saw penguin highways. Do you see the little channels in the snow there? They're the paths that the penguins take to go to their nests. So they follow the highway up into the rocks and so on. We walked in the Penguin highways as well because it was a lot easier to go up the highway than it is to try to cross the snow. We went to Nico Harbor, got there in the evening. And there were lots of gentoo penguins breeding there as well. And we watched, we were on the continent at that point, we landed, and these are glaciers calving or dropping big chunks off of the glacier. And you can see at the bottom, there's a lot of like fuzzy snow flying and so on. So big crevices form, and then all of a sudden you hear a crack and a boom, and look, and you'll see the snow cascading down. And it makes a tsunami, so there is a wave forming there, and it's smart to get off the beach when that happens and get upland a little bit. Here's some more snow falling down, and then here comes the wave into the beach. We saw more penguins in this area who still had eggs and not fledglings, so that was sort of interesting. But we also saw some of the big birds, like the skuas, going in and predating the eggs and taking them. So it's a hard life for a penguin. Here's one who has had one egg hatch, and the second one still waiting. And the skua is sitting right by the nest. We saw rafts, and I mean big, big rafts of penguins, particularly gentoo at that place. And here's a portrait of a crab-eater seal. It's got such a pretty face. He did some antics for us. And then we went on a cruise around Useful Island. Nobody can tell us what it was useful for, but that's its name, Useful Island. There's a gentoo on the rocks. And we saw an ice cave that was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And an ice conch shell. And Mina City tents, for those of you who know about Mecca, and the Mina City tents. There were ice tacos there. And a pinnacle iceberg. They have names for the different kinds of icebergs. You can see how it got its name, and you can see the layers of snow year by year. That they have a lot of snow or a little bit of snow. And another leopard seal. With his flipper up, that's a signature of identifying that seal from far away. It looks like a sail when he puts his flipper up. And you can see his leopard spots on his chest. And you can see his teeth. We were out cruising in the ice, but I shot this picture before I got back into the Zodiac. Just like the penguins were saying goodbye to us. We were heading north now to come back up to from the southernmost parts, and we again ran into orca whales, pods of them. And we went to our last stop, Deception Island. Deception Island is made by the rim of a volcano. Antarctica is very volcanic, and it has a lot of very active volcanoes. So that's something that I never really understood. But the beaches are all black, or stones with some volcanic rock in it and so on. But this particular island has a cauldron, which is the harbor in the center, So you have to go through an area called the Bellows to get in. And it's a very narrow opening and you go in, but there's a port in there. And there were some military ships in there from Argentina, one from Australia, and so on. So it is a busy area. They exchange supplies there. Supply trips come in and then they take them to some of the stations around Antarctica. We saw Cape Petrels there, the same little bird that we saw when we first arrived in the area. And we found out they were nesting there. Now, every arrow on that slide is pointing to a nesting petrel. I think there are around 13 of them in that slide. It was amazing, but when I get home and I'm on my computer and I look and I go, OMG, what in the world is going on here? And then I kept looking and looking and found more and more. Now, that doesn't include any of the little chicks that are gray, that blend in, and they're hard to see. Although there are a few that I thought were pretty sure they were chicks, but they really are hard to discern because they blend into the surrounds. There was an Antarctic fur seal on the beach. He's much more like a sea lion, actually, because he can get up on his front flippers and move like a sea lion. And he also has an external ear like a sea lion, but in fact he is a seal. You can see his little ear there on the side of his head. So now we're heading back up to Drake's Passage. Here's a southern giant petrel flying along with us. And a sooty shearwater. They are the most common pelagic bird in the world, sooty shearwaters. And Roberta and I were lucky enough to help rescue one that thought during a storm that a parking lot in High Point was something safe to land on. And our bird rescue group in the area was notified. They went out and got the bird, and they needed someone to take the bird to the shore to rehab her down on the Outer Banks who could take care of the bird and then hopefully release it. So we volunteered. And we went and picked up the bird, put it in a cat carrier on a little neck ring so it could sit and be comfortable in the cat carrier. We stopped every hour on the way down and fed it little fish and kept it hungry and hydrated, and it was a sweet little bird. It was during the Hurricane Florence that it came in. So we named the bird Flo, and she was very happy, alert, looking around, happy to get her food every hour, and we handed her over to the rehabber, and he tried to get her to fly off one of the back bay beaches to see what would happen. But the bird wasn't ready to fly, so he took the bird back to his rehab unit and took care of it for 6 weeks. He had a flight cage, he trained it to fly again. It had an exhaustion syndrome that birds get when they have flown long distances and just physiologically can't fly anymore, much like a marathon runner might experience if they overdo it. So he, and it's actually, they have some muscle pathology from that. So he worked with the bird and got it back in good health. And then they put it on a vessel and took it out to sea and let it go. And we had a video of it flying away. So that's one success story right here out of this area where we got a little sooty shearwater back to its habitat. Here's a white-chinned petrel. It's hard to see the white there, but it is around his beak. And in the water, it's hard again to see, but he has a white beak. And here's a wandering albatross. What a treat. We were pretty excited about that. They're hard to find, but we got one. And then we saw the lighthouse at Cape Horn, and we were back again. Well, thanks for your attention, and we can answer any questions you might have.
Are some of those pictures yours?
All are mine except a couple on National Geographic. I think the first seal was Kathy's picture.
What camera do you use? What
I have a
camera?
Canon R EOS R. It's a digital kind of thing. I'm sorry. It's a Canon 5D EOS.
What year was this?
2019, January of 2019, yes.
Patagonia Mountains part of the Andes,
That's a good question.
and they connected.
It's a good question. I don't know much about what happens to them as they go north. I know that Ushuaia is like going to, like Boone. There's lots of stores for outfitters, people who are going to hike the mountains. So it's real interesting. That culture I've seen in Lake Placid, New York, up in Alaska, you know, but that sort of like outpost place to get stuff is what Ushuaia is like. Yes.
The first stop, I believe it was Roberts.
Robert.
Roberts. It looked like it was on the other side of the peninsula there. Did you have to hike over there, or was it?
Well, when we land on beaches, so the pictures that we take on the way in doesn't always reflect where we landed. And that's because I'm taking pictures and I have no idea where we're going to land. And they know where they're going, but when we come in between the islands and in close and so on, you sometimes get deceived. You see a nice beach, but in fact, if you go around the corner, there might be a nicer one with a lot more birds on it. So, yeah.
Well, I was looking at the overview of the map, thinking about the map, and it looked like it was over on, you had the main channel there where I could see where most of the places that you visited were there by ship. You know, the ship could get to them through the water. But that one looked like it was over on the other side. That's some land.
No, they were all, actually Robert was on the west side of the peninsula before we went into the Weddell Sea, which was on the east side. So we had landings first on the west, then into the Weddell Sea, and there were landings there, and then back out, you know, and then we went down on the west side to Lanier Channel. Yes?
What are the biggest threats environmentally to this area or ecological?
Global warming. Because warmer the climate, the more the habitat is destroyed, the food source is affected by the warming, and then we'll have to add some plastic into that mix, because you all know about microplastics. Supposedly our bodies are full of them right now. But the poor animals in the sea, I mean, some of the shags at the Beagle Channel were using plastic roping and stuff to make their nests. And, you know, that kind of thing is just heartbreaking to see what happens. But there are actually large areas out in our oceans now which are like plastic islands. It looks like something that came out of a landfill just all over the surface of the sea. So the plastics are the biggest, you know, secondary threat, I think, to their food source. And the warming of the climate is a disaster for them.
Will it happen quicker there than it will, say, around the equator, or generally with the whole world facing warming at the same time?
It might be a little bit slower down there. Yes, Roberta?
Yeah, let me answer
Yeah.
some questions. First, with the global warming, there's an ice sheet, so in the wintertime, the ice can move 12, 14, 16 miles off land. And the krill hide under the sheets, and that's where the animals also hide to eat the krill. And the krill is about the size of a paper, large paper. With the global warming, that ice is not forming as human predators called illegal fishermen who come down and get the krill. So you can go to your local pharmacy and get krill fish oil. We're trying to get people not to use krill. So the krill population is declining, particularly up in the peninsula area, which means a lot of the Gentoo penguins are going south. Heading further, or I should say, further around the island, but then they're running into more penguins. So there's now a squeeze of colonies of penguins. Not quite so happy with one another. But the other thing with conservation is at least 12 to 13 treaties that have been signed and enforced since the late 1990s. And many of the European countries, South Africa and South America are part of those treaties that they're really trying to protect the land because nobody owns Antarctica. And so, they're looking at treaties trying to protect it. And how they know this is a funny story. They know that the microplastics are in the penguins. And there's a colony of Gentoo islands on one of the South Georgia islands. And so what the researchers did, they went around and they picked up penguin poop. And they analyzed it. So now they can say, yeah, there's plastic in the, in the food source, the krill will kill the krill because of the size of the microplastic compared to the size of the krill, but it's coming. And the one thing that you didn't mention, that I'm going to mention, is when you go to the island, she says, there's a lot of penguin poop. It smells. And you eventually get used to the smell. So these jackets, we had to put in plastic bags when we got onto the airplane. But the only problem is the rest of your clothes is permeated with smell. So you get on the plane, people still walk by and look at you. So funny, they assumed that we had taken, showers in about 8 weeks. Can't tell people, it's penguin poop. They think you're a little crazy.
I have a picture, which I didn't have in this set, but it's what I call Poopy Penguin, and he's just covered with pink mud, and he's hopping down rocks. I have a series of them coming down. He's on his way to get a bath in the water, but I sent it to a little guy, Kyle, who's a friend of mine in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He was about 7 at the time, and he would really be into penguin poop. That would be the kind of thing that would really get him happy. And so his mother said, why did you do that?
When I went to the Antarctic also, and when I went, I don't think we went to the west part. We went to, we got to go in the Zodiac to where, I think it was called Whale Island, where Shackleton's men had to be left while he went to the whaling station, which was east, I think, of where we were and where they were. And they had to stay for months. I think in order to survive, they had to eat their dogs.
Yeah. The people who survived in the island that I showed you, the shack, they ate penguins, because that's all was there.
And we got to see one macaroni penguin on that island. And they had these little yellow,
Right.
and they look like little
Tufts, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
And we got to see one of those, but the emperor, we didn't see any emperor.
But they come in to breed at different times, so you can be at an island that has just lost, a whole pile of macaroni penguins so that the Adelis can come in. Do you know what I mean? There's a succession of who is breeding on the island at different times. Yeah. So you're not going to see them all on any given trip unless you stay, I guess, a year. And you would see them all.
Yeah, we heard they were further south
Yeah.
than where we went.
Yeah. It's a great place, isn't it?
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't that cold. when
I
we
know.
went.
Did you, what time of year
It
did you go?
It was probably February,
Yeah.
because when we came back, we ended up in Buenos Aires at Mardi Gras, and they came on the ship with their costumes and everything. And we also went to the Falklands,
Yeah, that's a big trip to go to those
and
places.
they're still fighting over
Yes, they are.
who owns it.
Right. Yes.
You're mostly on the ship or on land a lot?
Oh, we were on the ship.
So you didn't go much on land?
Well, only the excursions to go see the wildlife or to take cruises. No, our berth was on the ship.
So-
There aren't any places to stay there, sir. You know, there are some military outposts,
We
but
went-
you can't stay there. Like Argentina has several stations that we
We
saw,
went to
and so
one.
does Chile. But there aren't any places where you can stay on the continent. Not tourists, no. Researchers, but they're also further toward the South Pole than the coast. But there is a lot of coastal kind of things going on. But no, they don't have B&Bs down there.
Well, this is not a real strenuous trip that you took.
Well, it can be as strenuous as you wish, because when you make the trips onto the islands, you can go out on pretty strenuous hikes if you want to. You know, and that varies with, you know, what the terrain is like, and also whether they can land at certain places. You know, they have to pay attention to the tides and all those kinds of things. So, but generally, I don't think you would have to be in super top-notch shape to go on the islands. You know, you can get out and walk along the beach and enjoy it because the birds are there. So, yeah, you don't have to do the hiking if you didn't want to. Yeah.
And where we went, the penguins have the right of way.
Yes, they
And
do.
if you are walking and they are ahead of you in your path, you have to stop and wait for them to move.
That's right. And sometimes they just stop.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to go shoo them away.
Right, exactly.
And I also learned that penguins, the babies will try to eat from somebody else's mother, and the mother will not feed the baby unless it's hers.
Yeah, they know their offspring, and that's who they feed, and they don't. It's a lot of work to go get the food that they need, so they're not going to give it to the wrong child. Give it to the child that's theirs. Any other questions? Yes?
What are the sizes of these penguins?
What?
Size.
The size? Well, the biggest one that, the emperor could be up to waist high. The Chengsu is about this big. He's big. The Adelis are